Next up, the state's convoluted process for putting ballot questions before voters hit another key procedural moment this week. Secretary of State Bill Galvin announced that supporters of 7 proposed laws had gathered enough signatures to send their proposals to the legislature, which can now legislate on the issues in question or just take a pass, in which case those proposed laws will likely go before voters come November, but not definitely. Joining me to discuss the ideas that made the cut and what, if anything, the House and Senate are likely to do next is Katie Lannan. She covers the State House for GBH News. Katie, thanks for being here, and good to see you as always. So when you and I talked about this last in this space, there were dozens of these questions kicking around. I mentioned that now there's, did I get that number right, 7?
Yes and no.
Yes and no. Okay. All right, let's accentuate the positive. In what sense are there 7 questions?
So there's 7 different petitions that Secretary of State Bill Galvin forwarded to the legislature this week. There's 3 more he's expected to certify for a total of 10. And this is a lot of math, a lot of numbers for a lot of, minutia here. But 5 of the 10 questions are different versions of the same proposal. That's the proposed ballot question that would reshape the relationship between, redefine at least, the relationship between platforms like Uber and Lyft and their drivers. Has to do with their employment status, their rights and benefits as workers.
Okay, and then what are the other ones?
So there's another rideshare drivers question that comes kind of from the opposite angle. That's letting drivers unionize. So apart from that, there's one that would legalize psychedelics.
Yep.
State Auditor Diana DeZoglio is hoping to be officially granted the power to audit the legislature, something top lawmakers have resisted. There is a bid to scrap the use of the MCAS test as a graduation requirement for high schoolers.
That's really an interesting
one.
That's
a hot one.
Stakes.
And there is a bid to eliminate the lower minimum wage for tipped workers.
That's right.
I think that's everything. I was not counting.
I wasn't counting. I should have been counting on my fingers since you had the hard job and I had the easy one. But I think we've got everything there. Hopefully we're right. I'm sure we'll hear from people if we don't. And just another reminder on process. I mentioned this in the intro, but so now that these 7 to 10 questions are either have advanced or are likely to advance, they go to the legislature, which gets a chance to act on these topics. And then if the legislature does not act on them, does not legislate on these questions, they will probably, but not necessarily, be on the ballot in November, right? What could derail them? Let's say the legislature doesn't act on any of these. What could keep them from getting on the ballot?
So I should note, too, off the top that the app-based drivers employment status question, not all 5 of those are going to end up before voters. It's not that you're going to be deciding the minutia of which version of benefits they'd get. That campaign will put forward one of those questions, likely. So that's one way it'll get winnowed. There is another signature gathering threshold. They have to get more than 12,000 additional voter signatures over the summer.
Easier than the one they just hit.
Yeah, it's a much lower lift.
Not a slam dunk.
Exactly. And, a campaign might decide to drop it, that they're no longer interested in pursuing it because of other national or state policy developments. Anything can happen politically in a matter of months.
When you talk about a campaign potentially dropping it, one thing that I've been interested in this cycle, maybe it always happens, but I've just noticed it in this cycle, is that there's often a split between activists who like a particular idea and principle on whether the best way to achieve it, best way to make a new law is to put it before voters as a ballot question or to have the legislature take action. We saw that with State Rep Mike Connolly's failed push to get rent control on the ballot. And now we're seeing it with this legalization of psychedelics question that you talked about as well. There are people who like that idea, who want it to go to voters, and people who don't want it to go to voters. Why might it be preferable, if you have a big new idea, why might it be preferable to go through the legislature as opposed to the public?
So the thing is, when you have a ballot question, it's a yes or no vote in your polling booth or your vote by mail ballot. Voters can't amend the proposal that's before them. So if people like the idea broadly of, say, legalizing psychedelics, but don't care for this one particular approach that's set out in the question. That's the dynamic here, right? There's a DC-based group that's done work nationally on this issue that's behind the ballot question, and there's a local advocacy group that's been taking more of a grassroots approach with decriminalization measures locally that they've been pushing, and they've been wary of the potential costs from a regulatory-heavy approach. They've got a rally planned for next week, kind of pushing back against what they say is a corporatization movement, really. So
that's interesting because as you make that point, you're highlighting the fact that if you are opposed to something, it's easier to oppose it if you say, look, this is a national group coming in, they're trying to do this in 10 other states, for example. They're not attuned to the particular realities that we have to think about here in Massachusetts. It's too broad brush, and that's a nice argument to be able to make against a ballot question.
Sure, yeah. Even if you like the principles, you might want to go about it a different way that, people who have been doing the work here for a long time are focused on. Okay,
so we've got about a minute and a half for you to answer this question. Of these issues that are going to be floating around, which ones is the legislature most likely to act on by the end of April, right? They don't have a ton of time here.
Right. They have until the end of April to pass it on their own. Sometimes you can see negotiations with a campaign to maybe drop a question in lieu of something else, go on longer. That's what happened with the grand bargain a few years ago that knocked off several ballot questions.
Lumped them all in one piece of legislation.
Exactly. But, I think the driver employment status question is one that, because there's two different proposals with two different goals, that's one that's maybe ripe for a legislative compromise. Of course, also, this is an issue that the legislature has had a chance to act on for years now. And hasn't.
Yeah, it seems like it's been floating around forever. You mentioned that grand bargain from a few years back when all these issues that were maybe going to be on the ballot were tied together legislatively and disposed of that way. Could we see something similar where you've got, legalization of psychedelics and the status of rideshare drivers and one of the many things that you named earlier that I'm now forgetting, where all these things that don't necessarily go together are in fact cobbled together in one big omnibus piece of legislation?
Well, what happened in, I think it was 2018, a lot of those had to deal with labor and the retail sector. It was a sales tax question, paid family leave, minimum wage, and phasing out time and a half on holidays. So those involved a lot of the same interest groups. Here you have a much broader array of interested parties. I don't want to rule anything out because, like I said, anything can happen in a matter of months.
But it's less intuitive.
Yeah, it'd be harder to cobble something together, I think, that satisfied everyone.
Right. Thank you for this overview. I learned a ton, and now it kind of makes sense where it did not before. Katie Lannan, appreciate it.
Thanks, Adam. Always good to talk to you.